I had wanted to plan a surprise party and get away for my girlfriend's 30th birthday. She had mentioned wanting to go hit the slopes. It was January, so it's still wintertime at this point. I organized this months ahead and had invited some of her closest friends to join. I ended up renting an Airbnb cabin that had enough rooms to house 10 people or 5 couples. On the basement lower floor level, there was 2 beds. A room on the first floor had a bed and 3 rooms upstairs. Also adding that this cabin was in a beautiful rural neighborhood in Tahoe, California, with tons of cabins next door. There's nothing in particular about it, and there are other people staying around. Of course, my girlfriend and I take the master bedroom upstairs, and right across the hall is another couple in one room. My girlfriend's cousin is by herself in the third room next door. All rooms are taken. In the middle floor is a lively area with games, a fireplace, and a foosball table. These details are somewhat relevant and important later in the story. First night was a night of merry drinking and games. To celebrate the occasion, we had decorated the living area and blown up balloons to be loosely strewn around the large and cozy living room and family room where we embedded, almost uneventful with respect to weird happenings. Except towards the end of the night, balloons would randomly pop at odd intervals. Someone in our group suggested it was the balloons getting attracted towards the heater vents and popping. I was dismissive of this because not all of them that popped were congregated near vents. I didn't want to argue or suggest anything weird at this point. After we all retired for the night and all the lights were off, we could hear balloons pop downstairs at random intervals that reverberated through the silent house. This happened between 2 to 3:30 a.m. The next morning, still plenty of healthy balloons strewn about. Fast forward to night 2. After we returned from snow activities, we prepared for drinking and the usual. After a full days worthy of shredding the snow, we all collectively retired a bit earlier than the previous night and decided to retire around 11:30 to midnight. Here's where I personally experienced things that got me feeling weird. Since it was cold, I decided to go downstairs to turn on the thermostat. Our couple friends across the hall had their door slightly open ajar, lights were on, and the bathroom was in use. As I'm going downstairs in the dark stairwell, I hear the floorboards behind me creak, and I figure it was my friend coming out to follow me for a cup of water or to go to the kitchen. As I walk across the living room and stop at the thermostat, the lights are still off at this point, and the creaks continue, and then I hear it stop a few feet behind me, near the kitchen. The kitchen lights didn't turn on, and I hear nothing else. Feeling like he was waiting behind me, and I was being watched, I said, "What's up, dude? Need something?" I turn around and nobody is there. I've only ever read about the dreadful feeling of being watched, and it is indeed every bit dreadful upon realization in person. A minute ago, I swore someone followed me down. I was taken aback. My skeptical ass, once again, took note and spoke nothing of it. I go back upstairs. About 30 minutes pass, and it's still cold at this point. Everyone is asleep, and I decide to turn up the thermostat a couple notches, nothing crazy. I turn on the upstairs hallway light bright enough to light the steps and see from downstairs. I proceed to head downstairs and stop once again at the thermostat. No floorboard creaks except for my own steps this time. As I'm turning up the thermostat and thinking to myself how odd the creaking was the first time, the noise broke my train of thought. I heard the ball from the foosball table several feet away near the fireplace audibly roll across its surface and hit one of the side walls. Nobody's around, and I am certainly too far away to touch it. I froze in fear and hastily went upstairs back to sleep, not knowing how to mentally process the increasing event occurrences. I eventually sleep under the pretense that nothing is definite enough for me to be conclusive, sure that this cabin is haunted. I don't mention or wake anyone up about my experiences. The next morning, as we left and drove back home, the balloons were brought up by my friend's girlfriend, who stayed across the hall. I took this as an opening to talk about my experiences and disclose them. At this point, my girlfriend's friend got pale and gets serious and tells us that the previous night she was still wide awake when she noticed a dark figure standing at the foot of her bed. She states that she went into panic mode after blinking and realized that it wasn't a dream or hallucination and shook her boyfriend awake, and who I thought followed me down the stairs earlier that night, only to have it disappear. This, by far, coupled with my experience, is undeniable evidence. These events, standalone, could be nominal and maybe explained, but collectively, it's hard to deny that something was present in a mess. I was about 16 at the time, and I am half indigenous. I was visiting my uncle on my mom's side. at this cabin located in the woods of northwestern Maine because I was driving my grandpa up to visit them for the fall season. The cabin was rather small and could only accommodate my uncle, aunt, and grandpa, so I was told to sleep in the camper that was set back farther into the woods. That evening went by as usual. My aunt made dinner and we all laughed and shared stories and eventually turned in for the night. I took a flashlight and started my way out to the camper. About halfway down, I shut out the flashlight and looked up to my night sky. It was at this point I noticed how quiet the forest had become. There were no birds or sounds of crickets or rustling leaves, just pure silence. I suddenly got this intense feeling of dread deep within my gut, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. The voice in my head told me to bolt to the camper as fast as I could. For some reason, my instincts told me I didn't belong there and something was watching me. When I made it to the camper, I slammed the door shut and double locked it, closing the window blinds. I swear I could hear my heart pounding in my ears as I laughed at myself for getting so worked up over nothing. The entire night I was restless in my sleep. I couldn't help but hear footsteps and movement all around the camper. I told myself it was just curious animals and grazing deer, but my dreams were haunted by something I couldn't see, and fortunately, this would not be my final experience of the weekend. By morning, all seemed normal. I thought about mentioning what had happened to my grandfather over breakfast, but I was worried that he would brush me off as being overly dramatic or being too used to city life. I let the odd night slide off my mind as I enjoyed the day with my family and their big shepherd Frank. Just to calm my nerves, I asked for Frank to accompany me in the camper that evening and ensure I felt safe. The walk back was once again fine until I began to enter the tree line. I'm not sure if it was because I was feeling nervous as well, but Frank seemed to be on edge with his ears perked and head on a swivel. That night, he slept in the bed of the trailer with me. I felt safer with the dog there. However, I had an extremely awful dream in which, when I awoke, Frank was staring at the wall of the trailer with his hackles standing on end. When the morning hit, I packed my bags to leave in the afternoon and brought Frank out of the trailer and led him out to the small field between the cabin and the thick woods. I was kicking his ball for him to excitedly chase, grab, and return to me. We continued this game until I kicked the ball a bit too hard and rolled it right down to the edge of the woods. Frank raced down to the ball until his full sprint turned into a full stop, digging his paws into the dirt, meters past where the ball had landed. He was standing stiff, fur on end, and ears pinned back and unmoving. I called for him to come, which he always responded to, but he didn't even acknowledge me. I began to walk down there to where he was, calling his name a little bit louder, still with no response. I grabbed him by the collar, getting kind of worried, and at this point his eyes stared directly into the trees. I yelled his name loudly, giving him a little tug. The forest was silent. Moments later, the silence was broken by an echo of my voice yelling back. However, this echo was delayed and distorted. It sounded like me, but also not like me. I had frozen solid and looked into the deep woods, holding my breath only for another scream to come from the woods of my voice. I immediately turned and booked it back to the cabin. I came to my aunt crying and trying to tell her that there was something out there in those woods. She comforted me and told me it must have been nothing, but she seemed as if there was not the answer she wanted to give. My family's rather superstitious, especially me. I'm guessing she didn't want me to overthink anything. Left that afternoon, and I have not been back there since that weekend. So to give you a little bit of background information on this story, which is 100% true, I'd like to start with the fact that I'm European. As for me and my friends in this story, we are from Spain. And when this happened, at the end of September 2023, we were fairly new to the US. I moved here a while back for law school, and so did all my friends. We've been living here for a few months and decided to explore the nature of this beautiful continent as we all live in New York City. So long story short, we decided to go on a road trip to Canada, driving around Lake Ontario and then drove back to New York City through upstate New York. I'm a male, my friends were three females. For the sake of anonymity, let's call them Lisa, Ann, and Charlotte. Everything went super smooth until last night. So for our last night, we had rented an off-grid cabin in a remote area in the woods in upstate New York. To give some locals an idea, we were like half an hour from Harrisburg, I think. Me and Lisa had decided to spend one night in this cabin because it was one with nature. The cabin was super old, made from log wood, and there was no running water or electricity. Both me and Lisa had experience with survival in the wild in Europe. I, for myself, had been a Boy Scout my whole life and even was a scout leader for a while. On other two friends were, as much as I loved them, purebred city girls. They had pretty much zero experience with camping or just being in a place where there was no service for the phones, as was this case in this cabin. We had been driving all day to get there, and when we reached the beginning of the forest, it was already past 10 p.m., and it was really dark that night. While driving to this place, we lost internet connection with the GPS, and so I had to drive to the cabin on intuition paired with a good old-fashioned map, hoping for the best while trying to drive safely on these muddy trails. It was also rainy the whole day. On the way there, Anna and Charlotte were in the back of the car, and the moment they lost phone service, they got pretty uneasy for the rest of the ride. All of a sudden, in the pitch black darkness of the forest, we all saw a campfire, but there was no houses around or people, just a campfire. A well organized one, since the fire was not spreading and it was not as big as a bonfire. It kind of startled us all, as if this was a little bit weird since there was no one around and we were really deep in the forest already. Plus, it was already getting late. When this happened, we also reached the end of the trail and we figured we had taken the wrong trail at the crossroads before, so I turned around and we were on our way back again. Half an hour later, and a couple of wrong trails later, we finally had arrived at our destination, as we could finally see the first glimpse of this godforsaken cabin in the middle of nowhere. To give you an idea how old it was, the bathroom was made out of wood and was outside of the cabin. When we arrived, it was still raining. Both Anna and Lisa were definitely not in the mood for getting out of the car and getting in the cabin with zero lights. So me and Lisa let the lights on in the car and went inside the cabin. Also using our phone flashlights to check the cabin out and see if we could find any old flashlights, which we did, and to see if we could turn on the fireplace, which we didn't because all the wood was still wet from the rain and it seemed no one had prepared any dry wood anywhere. So with a couple of old flashlights and a small improvised fire I managed to make in the stove, we all four got into the cabin and started to make some pasta for us. Meanwhile, the girls were preparing the beds and closing the windows since it was already cold in this part of the state. The cabin had a small ladder which led to an elevated room/space for the bed where all three of the girls could fit in, and I would sleep downstairs in a bunk bed that seemed older than the First World War. While making pasta, Anna, one of the city girls, came up to me, and knowing that both Lisa and Charlie did not like to hear anything scary at night, told me that she had seen an old cemetery in the middle of the forest on the way to our cabin, and that she had seen a figure walk around there. I first laughed it off as nothing. Being from Spain, we take promises very seriously. To swear on God is very serious for us, and she swore to God that she was not lying. I told her that I believed her, but there was no need to panic as I'd walk out the doors when we go to sleep. We had some pasta, managed to make a couple of s'mores, and drink a couple of beers, or at least I did. They all had just one. I can assure you that I am not drunk after a couple of beers and that I would never start to hallucinate just in case anyone thinks I saw stuff because of the beer. They all three went to sleep pretty early after finishing the s'mores and their beer, and I considered that I really love the outdoors and that I don't really mind a little bit of rain. Decided to take my last beer and a flashlight outside to the front porch, and sat myself down with my beer while enjoying the sound of rain and the lovely sight of not seeing a single light in the distance. I could greatly appreciate this coming from New York City, and I just scanned the area around with my flashlight. There was nothing much really to see, besides a lot of trees and a small creek a little further away. All I could hear was the wind, the rain, and the running water down in the creek. That was until I suddenly hear what I would describe as a weird roar. The first thing that came to my mind was a bear, but I researched well before I tripped, and I knew bears were not common at all in this part of the state. I also know what a bear roar would sound like, and it did not resemble a bear at all, except from the fact that it was a deep roar, if you get what I mean. Startled but not really scared, I continued to scan the rest of the forest, for as far as I could see from the porch. It was then when my eyes caught the glimpse of a figure well hidden deep into the tree line. I would describe the figure as tall. As a reference, I am 6'4" and thought this thing was at least a foot or two higher than me. It was also well hidden because it had brown fur. This is what I think it was at least, or its skin in any case. Blended in well with the trees in autumn, it was definitely aware of our presence, as I saw two eyes glimpsing into my flashlight. I could not tell you what it was, but I swear to God that it was not a bear. It was bipedal and rather long arms, I would say. We looked at each other for what seemed an eternity, but in reality it was more like 5 seconds before it vanished behind a tree, and I heard another roar. It was then when all my hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I was definitely very much scared. I went inside as quickly as I could and locked all doors and closed all curtains. I quickly went to bed and tried to wave it off as just my exhaustion from driving all day, playing tricks on my mind. But I promise you this, it was very real. After an hour or so, I calmed down and finally fell asleep. The rest of the night was uneventful, and the next morning, when I went to relieve myself after having drank beer the night before, the weather had cleared and it was rather sunny. As far as I could see, the forest was calm and beautiful. No sign of any animals or anything abnormal. We had a nice breakfast that morning and left for our way back to the city that never sleeps.